Two figures trudged through the biting snow, a woman clutching something precious close to her heart. Not children nor mere belongings. Two fragile German shepherd puppies barely clinging to life. The storm tore mercilessly at her face, stealing her breath away, yet she pressed on, knowing that to stop was to invite death. Far away, nestled beneath the raging storm in a humble cabin, a Navy SEAL sat by the flickering fire, his loyal K9 resting quietly at his feet. A man haunted by memories louder than the howling wind. He believed the days of rescue were behind him, until through the blizzard's roar came the soft sound of 3 desperate knocks. Shaking and vulnerable, but human. What came next would remind him and all of us that sometimes the smallest lives bring about the most profound miracles. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Type your country in the comments below. The night had swallowed Vermont whole. Snow fell in endless waves, each flake shimmering like embers against the pale light of the half-hidden moon. Sturdy pines bent in the storm's wrath, their icy limbs creaking like fragile bones worn thin with age. High up on a forgotten mountain road, a solitary cabin stood its roof, blanketed in white windows dark, and a chimney struggling to push smoke through the storm's fury. It was the kind of place no one found by accident. Inside, Logan Hayes sat close to the fire, the amber glow carving sharp lines across his weathered face. At 38, he still bore the sturdy frame of a Navy SEAL, broad shoulders, steady hands, a strength that refused to fade. But war had etched a quieter, weightier mark on his soul. His once dark brown hair now carried streaks of gray at the temples. A short beard covered his square jaw, and beneath it those steel blue eyes held the tension between vigilance and sorrow. He lived as though waiting for something long lost to return. By his side lay Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd cloaked in black and tan, his right side bearing a scar that ran through his fur like a pale river. The dog slept lightly, ears flickering at every creak and wail of the wind. Once Rex had been trained to detect explosives, charging into harm's way without a second thought. Now, like his master, he was retired into silent stillness. Their bond ran deeper than orders or duty. It was the unspoken connection between two souls burdened with too many hard truths. The fire popped softly, casting fleeting warmth as the wind howled outside, snow slamming against the windows like the night itself was desperate to break in. Logan leaned back, rough hands stroking his beard thoughtfully. It had been 3 years since he had spoken face to face with another living soul. 3 years since the funeral, since the flames that claimed his wife and son had consumed whatever meaning he'd once held. He hadn't been able to save them half a world away on a mission, while all that mattered turned to ash. Now the mountains were his sanctuary, a place where no one needed saving and where no one could reach him. Suddenly, Rex lifted his head. A soft, uncertain growl rumbled deep within him. Logan frowned. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Though his heart pounded fiercely, he strained to catch a sound. The storm roared, swallowing everything whole. Then faintly it came 3 knocks, soft and uneven like a trembling hand tapping against wood. Frozen in place, he knew no one should be here. No vehicle could have braved this storm to reach so deep into the wilderness. The last time anyone had knocked on that door was many years ago. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself upright, his movements driven more by instinct than conscious thought. Rex rose beside him, hackles raised, tail stiff, but never hostile, alert and watchful. The knock came again, weaker now. Logan stepped across the room, his boots thudding heavily on the time-worn wooden floor. He paused only a moment before unlatching the door. The wind slammed against him like a furious beast, hurling snowflakes that stung his face. For a fleeting heartbeat, all he saw was a blinding, swirling white. Then through the tempest a figure appeared. A woman stood there, barely able to keep upright. She was tall, though the storm had bent her shoulders low. Her coat was thin, frayed, and torn. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, hung in frozen clumps around her pale face. Her cheeks were ghostly pale, lips tinged blue, eyelashes coated in frost. Yet it wasn't her face that caught Logan's attention, it was the bundle pressed tightly against her chest. Wrapped in a worn, fragile blanket, it stirred faintly. Then came a soft, trembling whimper, neither the cries of a baby nor the wild animal's call. The woman's knees buckled just as Logan lunged forward, catching her before she collapsed. The bundle shifted, revealing 2 tiny German shepherd puppies, maybe 5 weeks old, soaked, shivering, their delicate paws chilled and numb. Her voice cut through the howl of the wind, barely more than a shaky whisper, "Please. They'll die." Inside, Logan's voice snapped, sharp and steady, commanding, as instinct took over. He lifted her effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing. She was light, shockingly so, cold as stone in his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, frozen strands of hair brushing his neck in a chilling touch. With a fierce kick, he slammed the door shut, sealing out the savage storm, and carried her toward the warmth of the fire. Rex followed close behind, nose low and tail calm but steady. The massive dog circled once before settling quietly beside the fallen woman, amber eyes fixed unwaveringly on the tiny forms in her arms. Logan knelt next to them, gently lifting the puppies, one in each hand. Their black and tan fur, just like Rex's, was soaked and matted with ice. They trembled violently, breaths quick and shallow. The woman stirred weakly, whispering hoarsely. "Found them by the old bridge. Someone left them." Her words faded into a coughing fit. Logan studied her carefully now, early 30s, maybe carrying a quiet grace despite her collapse. Grace Miller, he would learn later, but tonight she was merely a ghost carried in by the storm. Her skin was pale beneath cheeks reddened and rough from the bitter wind. Her body was slender and fragile, yet her eyes, those piercing gray-green eyes, shone with an unyielding fire. "You walked through this storm?" he asked quietly, already wrapping the puppies snugly in a dry blanket. "I had nowhere else to go," she murmured. "They were crying. I couldn't leave them." Logan swallowed hard, throat suddenly dry with emotion. There was something in her weary yet unwavering voice that reached deep into the part of him he'd long buried with his own family's pain. He cradled the puppies gently, feeling the faint flickers of life beneath his palms. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, words that surprised even himself. He glanced around. The cabin wasn't built for guests. Only 2 chairs and a lonely cot filled the space. The shelves were half bare. He doubted how he could fit another soul, let alone 3 more living beings, inside a space designed for solitude. But none of that mattered tonight. He moved with purpose, stacking wood into the stove, stirring the glowing embers until the fire soared fiercely back to life. Then he nestled the puppies near the hearth wrapped in wool and helped the woman down into his chair. Rex edged closer, sniffing the tiny creatures before settling down beside them, curling up protectively. The warmth from his fur radiated like a living shield. One puppy whimpered softly, pressing its nose into Rex's chest. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Logan caught a flicker of warmth in the old dog's weary eyes. Grace blinked slowly, her body trembling uncontrollably. "You live here alone?" "Yeah," he answered without glancing up. She tried to smile, but it came out more like quiet surrender. "Then thank you for opening your door." Her voice broke again, more fragile than before. Logan poured a cup of water, pressing it into her shaking hands. "Drink this," she obeyed, spilling half over her coat. He didn't mind. He'd witnessed soldiers cling to life with far less. As she drank, he studied her silently. Everything about her, from her torn gloves to the worn boots dusted with frost to the way she shielded the puppies. Even in exhaustion, spoke of a woman who refused to give up. There was bravery there. Not flashy or heroic, but a stubborn flame that refused to die out. Outside, the storm pounded relentlessly on the roof. But inside, the world had transformed. The fire crackled louder, filling the once heavy silence. Rex's breathing slowed into a steady, peaceful rhythm beside the 2 tiny bodies. Grace's eyelids fluttered as warmth gradually returned to her frozen skin. Logan stood over them, uncertain what to do next. He hadn't been anyone's savior in years. Yet here they were, 3 strangers dropped at his door, shaking and alive. He exhaled slowly, feeling a subtle shift in the weight burdening his chest. The wind howled one final time, rattling the door like a last plea to be let in once more. Logan turned toward it, the handle still frosted from when he'd opened the door just moments ago. For a long beat he stared, realizing something had shattered the walls of his isolation. He glanced back at Grace, now asleep by the fire, her arms loosely cradling the air where the puppies had been. Their soft breaths rose and fell alongside Rex, all wrapped in the gentle glow of flame and fur. Logan's voice fell to a whisper, almost lost amid the storm's howl. "You're safe now?" He leaned down, lifting Grace gently, and laid her across the cot. Then he crouched to place the 2 puppies snugly by the fire, close to Rex's side. The cabin felt smaller, warmer, alive once more. As he stood, the door creaked softly in the wind behind him. Logan turned, staring at the faint outline of snow traced against the doorframe, the echo of those 3 knocks still lingering in the cold air. The storm outside raged on, relentless and cruel, but inside the cabin held its fragile peace. He took one last look at the woman, the puppies, and the old dog who had once followed him through the chaos of gunfire and now fiercely guarded something far gentler. Then he stepped back, closing the door shut, sealing them in, sealing out the biting cold. Unbeknownst to him, that single closing of the door marked the start of a journey that would forever alter his fate. The storm raged relentlessly until the early hours, and even then, it clung stubbornly, like a held grudge. Snow piled thick against the windows, while the towering pines outside bowed under its heavy burden. Inside that humble cabin, warmer air blended faintly with the scent of smoke pine sap and damp leather beginning to thaw. The stove's fire had burned long into the night, its amber glow now steady and soft. Logan Hayes knelt on the wooden floor by the hearth sleeves pushed high, tenderly drying the 2 tiny puppies with a rough towel. Their fur, black and tan, just like Rex's, had finally begun to soften again, no longer crusted with ice. Occasionally one let loose a fragile whimper, a delicate sound that sliced through the silence like the first flicker of hope. Grace Miller rested on the cot behind him, half-conscious. Her lips had lost their blue tint, though her face remained pale beneath the freckles artfully scattered across her nose. Her once iced chestnut hair now damp and loose over her shoulders. Logan caught her stirring her green-gray eyes, fluttering open slowly. Confusion clouded her gaze, at first the uncertain look of someone bewildered by where they were, or whether they had survived the night. He spoke softly. "You're safe now? You're in my cabin." His voice was raspy from disuse, yet gentle. Grace sat up weakly, drawing the wool blanket tighter around her frame. "What about the dogs?" she whispered. "They're alive," he promised. "Because of you." He nodded toward the hearth, where Rex lay curled like a guardian around the puppies. The old dog licked one's paw with care, with the tenderness of a mother watching over her own. The other pup nestled against his side, its tiny chest rising gently with each breath. Grace offered a faint smile, eyes fixed on the scene. "He's stunning," she murmured. "Is he yours?" "Yeah, that's Rex," Logan said. "We served together." She blinked, piecing it together. "You were in the Navy?" He nodded once. Sal's retired several years back. He didn't add more, and the subtle tone in his voice told her this wasn't a subject to pry into. The fire crackled, a sap bubble bursting with a sharp hiss. Grace's gaze dropped to her hands, slender, reddened from the cold, marred with tiny cuts. "I found them in a box," she confessed softly as though revealing a secret. "Near the old wooden bridge 3 miles from here, someone had left them abandoned. The box was soaked, half hidden under melting snow. They were crying so desperately I thought—" Her voice faltered, and she looked toward the fire as if the memory seared her skin. "I wrapped them in my coat, but the wind, it cut like blades. I kept moving forward, but everything around me blurred to sameness. I thought I was heading toward town, Logan lowered himself onto his heels, studying her worn but steady face. She wasn't some wanderer or reckless girl. There was a quiet strength in her, even at her most exhausted. Her tall posture, every word deliberate, a calm grace perfectly fitting her name. "You'd have perished if you'd gone another mile," he said finally. "You were lucky." Grace shook her head softly. It wasn't luck. Those puppies cried loud enough for someone to hear. A weary smile touched her lips. Maybe, just maybe, God made sure someone did. Logan stayed silent. He no longer spoke of God, not since the day he'd returned home to nothing but ashes. He turned his gaze back to the puppies, gently lifting one to inspect its paws. "They'll pull through," he assured. "They just needed warmth food and some time. Sounds like you've handled this before," she noted. He offered a slight shrug. "Field training, combat first aid. It didn't matter if it was a soldier or a dog. It's all about keeping the heart beating." Grace gave a faint smile, then looked down at the floor. "I used to be a veterinary nurse," she admitted, surprised by how naturally the words slipped out. "Back in Rutland, my husband and I ran a small clinic." Logan glanced her way. Had she hesitated? "He passed away 2 years ago, car accident. After that, I couldn't keep the clinic open. Bills, rent. People stopped coming." Her voice grew fragile as she trailed off. "I sold what I could, kept some supplies, and left town. Been drifting ever since." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the wind whispering against the cabin walls. Logan knew the kind of loss that left you hollow inside. He didn't press further. Instead, he rose and poured her a cup of coffee from the battered metal pot on the stove. She accepted it with both hands, holding it close as if it were something precious. "Thank you," she whispered softly. Rex shifted nearby, resting his muzzle on Logan's boot. Absent-mindedly, the man scratched the dog's ear. "He likes you," Grace observed, catching the calm in the old shepherd's eyes. "He doesn't trust many folks," Logan replied. "Takes him a while to open up." "Then maybe he sees something in you that I don't," she said softly, eyes gentle. Logan regarded her silently, unsure how to respond. She offered a faint smile, but said no more. The fire snapped again, steady and warm. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. It was filled with warmth, the scent of damp fur, and the subtle sweetness of instant coffee. Outside, the storm still hadn't surrendered. Wind screamed through the cracks in the logs, and snow swirled down from the eaves in light avalanches. Somewhere distant, a tree groaned and snapped under the heavy ice. Far away in the small town of Maple Hollow, Nora Bennett stood by her kitchen window, gazing out into the swirling white. She was 70, her silver hair tightly coiled in a bun, her face weathered but softened with kindness. Years ago, her late husband built the animal shelter that once stood behind their home before fire, claimed it 10 winters past, taking their daughter too. Since then, Nora had carried her grief like an unshakable companion. Now, as the storm roared on, she sipped her tea, long grown cold. An hour earlier, her neighbor, a young man named Curtis, who drove trucks, had stopped by. "Heard someone saw a woman walking on Ridge Road last night," he'd warned. "A blizzard like that? She won't make it." Nora's eyes lingered on the tree line beyond her yard. She couldn't rid her mind of that lost woman out there, alone with the storm closing in. Twice she reached for the phone, intending to call the sheriff, but froze each time. Too many folks have vanished in these woods. The mountain takes what it wants. Still, when she closed her eyes, she whispered a prayer, half out of habit, half out of hope that someone would find the lost. Back in the cabin, Grace's soft voice cut through the silence. "Do you ever feel lonely out here?" Logan asked as he looked up from washing a metal bowl meant for the dogs. Occasionally, he confessed, "but it's less painful than pretending I fit somewhere else." She regarded him with a pensive gaze. "You don't say much." "Not much to talk about," he answered, then gave a faint, almost shy smile. "Rex does most of the talking." Grace laughed quietly, a gentle sound neither of them recognized in themselves. "You know," she said, "for a man who calls this remote wilderness home, you're doing an incredible job saving lives tonight." His eyes met hers. "You are the one who brought them here. I only opened the door." That stopped her in her tracks. For a long moment their eyes locked. Two strangers joined by shared sorrow and an intangible bond they couldn't quite name. The puppies whimpered softly, and Rex nudged them closer to the fire, an unexpectedly tender gesture from such a tough creature. Grace leaned back, watching her eyelids growing heavy. "Rest," Logan whispered softly. "You're safe here," she murmured, curling beneath the blanket. The puppies settled into sleep. The fire crackled quietly as the wind outside began to fade. Logan sat back down, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Memories from his past flickered like shadows, faces he couldn't save, voices swallowed by smoke. But for the first time in years, he let those memories stay with him. When he glanced back at the cot, Grace was asleep. Rex shifted closer to her side, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight, ever vigilant and protective. Logan exhaled deeply. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the cabin a gentle rhythm had returned. A fragile heartbeat of humanity he'd almost forgotten was still alive. And deep inside, beneath scars and silence, something began to melt. Morning dawned slowly over the mountain peaks. The storm had spent its fury overnight, leaving behind a heavy silence, thick with reverence. Snow lay thick around the cabin, piled against the windows like ghostly curtains. Inside, the world had softened. The fire still glowed low in the stove, its amber light flickering against the rough-hewn logs. The scent of damp fur and coffee mingled with the faint metallic chill of melting ice. Grace awoke, warmed by that quiet comfort. Her first thought was the sound of breathing, not just her own, but layered rhythmic breaths joining Logan's, Rex's, and the gentle stirring of two small lives near the hearth. When she turned, she saw them. The puppies were awake, clumsy little bundles of black and tan fur, nudging at Rex's tail with earnest determination. Rex tolerated their antics with saintly patience. He lay stretched beside the fire, his giant paws twitching lightly as if caught in a dream, but his amber eyes remained open, watchful. Grace smiled without meaning to the sight of Rex, cradled by those tiny ones, stirred something tender deep within her chest. She sat up slowly, wincing as her injured arm reminded her of the night's toll. The bandage from the evening before had loosened, and crusted blood darkened its edges. Logan appeared from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs. The rich smell of instant coffee filled the room. He wore a gray flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the fabric worn and creased from years of hard use. Morning light revealed details. The fire's glow had hidden the slight hollows beneath his cheekbones. The jagged scar that ran from his jawline down to the edge of his beard traced a silent story, matched only by the quiet determination in every motion he made. It was the kind of focus forged in a life where one wrong move could mean the difference between life and death. "You should keep that arm still," he said, nodding toward the bandage wrapped around her. His voice was soft, but carried the ingrained authority of someone used to commanding respect. Grace let out a faint smile. "You're always giving the morning's first medical orders. Old habits," he replied. "Let me fix that for you. You shouldn't be using that hand just yet." She paused briefly, then extended her arm. His hands were steady, roughened by work, yet tender. He carefully peeled the bandage away and cleaned the tiny wound with alcohol. Grace bit down on a sharp hiss, and he offered a brief, apologetic smile. "Sorry it's cold," he murmured. "It's all right," she whispered back. For a heartbeat, silence settled between them like a soft cloak. She felt the grounded calm radiating from him, a quiet strength that seemed to fill the space around them. When he finished, he wrapped a clean strip of gauze around her hand with precise care. "There," he said, "as good as new. Are you always this careful with strangers?" she inquired softly. He held her gaze for a moment. "I stopped seeing people as strangers a long time ago." She didn't know what to say, and turned her eyes back to the warmth of the fire. One of the puppies stumbled clumsily over Rex's paw and tumbled onto its back, legs flailing in protest. Rex responded by licking the small belly once, as if to say, "Come on, soldier, get up." Grace laughed softly, a sound unguarded and light. "They've already claimed him as their father," she said. Logan glanced over at the scene, a subtle smile playing on his lips. He's been waiting to protect something again. Grace met his gaze and really took in the faint creases around his eyes, the way his shoulders relaxed as he watched Rex and the pups. Beneath the veils of silence around him, there was a tenderness almost palpable. "Maybe you both have," she whispered gently. He didn't answer, but she saw his jaw tighten before he rose to his feet. "I'll get you some food," he said quietly. As he moved to the stove, Grace observed him, deliberate and efficient, but weighed down by an exhaustion that ran deep. She wondered about the ghosts that haunted this place for him, and she wondered if he realized he wasn't the only one carrying those silent burdens. Outside, the sunlight turned the snow into shimmering silver. Through the small window, Grace gazed at the forest, stretching endlessly. Quiet, unbroken, and breathtaking in its cold stillness. Somewhere far off, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically against a tree, shattering the silence. 2 miles away, that very silence bore witness to another story. Milo Carter was just 10 years old, small for his years, with straw-colored hair tousled beneath a wool cap. His right leg dragged slightly as he walked, a lasting reminder of a car accident that had taken his father away years ago. Since then, Milo lived with his mother, Claire, in a worn yellow farmhouse resting at the base of the ridge. Claire worked long double shifts at the diner downtown, leaving Milo alone for long stretches. To pass the time, he cared for the wildlife that wandered near the deer, the foxes, and sometimes the stray dogs that roamed in from the forest. That morning, with the storm at last easing, he made up his mind to carry food out into the woods, a routine his mother would have scolded him for if she had known. Draped in his father's oversized coat, 2 sizes too large, he held a tin filled with leftover diner food. The snow reached up past his knees, but his resolve never wavered. He arrived at the first row of trees, just as the wind began to stir again. He paused to catch his breath, leaning on a fallen tree trunk. The forest gleamed so brightly and white that it almost stung to look at. He didn't notice the dark clouds creeping back, low-hanging and heavy. By the time he sensed the weather shifting, the path behind him had already disappeared beneath a fresh blanket of snow. Back at the cabin, Logan caught a change in the light before he heard it. The soft moan of wind rising once more beyond the forest's edge. "Looks like it's rolling back in," he murmured. Grace turned toward the window, following his gaze. "Another storm coming might just be a front," he answered, though doubt laced his words. Meanwhile, the puppies scrambled over Rex's tail, their tiny claws tapping rhythmically against the wooden floorboards. Their wet paw prints left shimmering trails across the room, glistening in the warm glow of the firelight. Grace watched quietly, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "I think these little ones will be all right." "They'll be more than all right," Logan said. Rex is keeping watch over them. At the sound of his name, Rex lifted his head, ears twitching forward. He suddenly rose, his gaze snapping toward the door, fur along his back rising. Grace straightened instinctively. "What is it?" Logan stood, his senses sharp and ready. He recognized that look, the tense alertness right before action. "Something's out there," he whispered. Rex released a deep, resonant growl. Then, without warning, a single bark rang out, sharp, commanding, and urgent. Logan moved to the window, brushing frost aside. Beyond the trees, the endless snowy expanse lay silent, but for the whispering wind. Still, he felt it, that chilling prickling down the back of his neck that signaled danger was close. "Stay here," he said to Grace, his voice steady and resolute. He threw on his coat boots, thudding heavy against the wooden floor. Rex stood at the door, taut and poised, eyes locked on the shadowed forest. Logan hesitated, glancing back at Grace. She was standing now, pale but unwavering. "Be careful," she whispered. He nodded once and swung the door open. The cold struck him like a solid wall. Snow whipped wildly through the clearing, swirling amid the trees. Rex shot forward, barking again as his voice echoed across the valley. Something wasn't right. He didn't know what yet, but the very air felt charged, crackling with warning. He followed Rex into the blinding white, the world narrowing to the sound of wind-crunching boots and a distant, frightened human cry cutting through the storm. The forest had withdrawn into its cold stillness, fragile and silent. But Rex's bark rang out like an alarm across the valley. Logan pushed forward through the hardened snow crust, his breath steaming in the freezing air. Grace followed steadily behind, her scarf pulled tight, cheeks flushed and wind-chapped. The storm had stripped the world bare and silent. Yet the hush now felt wrong, too thick too, charged, as if the woods themselves held their breath in anticipation. But now the stillness felt wrong, too heavy, too deliberate, odd, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Rex halted at the brink of the slope, his tail rigid and nose lifted to catch the cold wind. Logan crouched down beside him. "What is it, boy?" The dog emitted a sharp, urgent whine and surged ahead. Logan followed, breaking through the crisp snow until his gaze landed on it, a form half swallowed by the frozen white. In that instant, his heart clenched tight. It resembled a body. "Grace," he called out. She hurried over, her eyes widening in shock. "Oh my God," she breathed. It was a child, a young boy, motionless and small, his coat stiff with frost's icy grip. Logan dropped onto his knees, gently brushing snow away from the boy's face. No older than 10, his blonde hair plastered to his forehead, lips pale as winter's breath, and skin nearly translucent. A faint pulse throbbed weakly at his neck. "He's alive," Logan said. Without hesitation, he peeled open his coat and wrapped it tightly around the boy, pulling him close to his own chest for warmth. Grace bent low, her breath shaky. "We have to get him back now." Rex let out a single bark, then shifted direction, leading them back through the snowy tracks. The climb uphill was relentless. Each step felt like dragging chains through powder. Logan carried the boy as if he were weightless, his arms numb but unwavering. Grace raced ahead to throw open the cabin door. Inside, warmth hit them like a flood. Logan gently laid the boy on the cot near the crackling fire, while Grace hurried to heat water on the stove. Rex paced anxiously in small circles, whining softly, his nose brushing the boy's trembling hand. "Stay back," Logan murmured, his tone gentle but firm. The dog obeyed, curling up by the fire, his eyes locked on the child. Grace wrung out a warm cloth and began carefully wiping frosty traces from the boy's face and hands. "He's frozen through," she said, her voice fragile with worry. Logan moved fast, removing the boy's wet gloves and boots, slipping dry wool socks onto his feet, then layering blankets around him. The boy's name, they would later learn, was Milo Carter. For now he was a fragile flicker of life resting in their care, his chest rising and falling unevenly, breath shallow. Logan checked his pulse again, stronger this time. Grace looked up at him, eyes wide. "You've done this before." He gave a faint nod. "Combat medic training. Hypothermia protocol warmed the core, not the skin. Keep him awake if he wakes." She swallowed hard. "Do you think he will? He'll live," Logan said quietly. "He just needs time." Grace sank down beside the cot, her hands gently tucking the damp hair away from the boy's face. For a long, heavy moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the fire's occasional pop and hiss. Finally, Grace's voice cracked softly. "He looks about the age my son would have been." Logan glanced at her, watching as her hand trembled slightly, smoothing the blanket over the boy's shoulders. "Your son?" he asked gently. She nodded, the light of the fire catching the tears in her eyes. "He didn't make it. Born too early. I only held him for a few minutes. After that?" Her voice faltered. "Everything fell apart. My husband couldn't handle the loss. We stopped talking, stopped existing." She let out a bitter laugh. "Sometimes it feels like I've been trapped in a storm ever since." Logan kept his gaze on the fire, his voice low when he finally spoke. "I know that pain." Grace looked at him, sensing his weight of sorrow. "You lost someone too." He was quiet for a long moment, jaw clenched tight. Then finally he whispered, "My wife and son. Lost them in a house fire. I was deployed when it all went down." His voice was low, stripped of all feeling, but heavy with what lingered behind. I returned too late. Grace watched him, her heart twisting with pain. So that's why you came here? He nodded solemnly. I figured the world had taken enough from me, so I quit giving it anything. For a long moment, silence wrapped around them. Snow tapped softly at the windows. Rex shifted closer to the boy, resting his head gently on the cot's edge, his steady breath filling the quiet room. Nearby, the two puppies slept huddled together by the hearth, small bodies nestled, dreaming of warmth. Grace's eyes stayed fixed on Logan's face. The firelight carved deep lines across his features. Maybe this boy was meant to find us, she whispered quietly. Maybe we both needed to remember how to save someone again. Logan said nothing, but a softness crept into his expression. Outside the forest stretched wide, cold and endless, but inside that little room life stirred once more, fragile, flickering yet real. Down in the town below the ridge, the storm's aftermath was just beginning to show its scars. Deputy Frank Dawson, a man in his late 40s with a weathered face and a thick brown mustache streaked with gray, trudged through the snow near the old wooden bridge. He'd served as sheriff's deputy in Maple Hollow for over 2 decades, enough years to know that bad weather always dragged worse stories behind it. Frank had a sturdy build, but moved with the slow caution of someone who'd learned patience the hard way. His blue eyes were sharp, yet heavy with fatigue. Too many years watching people at their lowest. He crouched near the bridge where Grace had found the puppies. Fresh tire tracks sliced through the snow leading into the woods. He ran his hand over one mark, frowning. Too clean, too deliberate. Whoever had been here wasn't lost. They came with a purpose. Damn fools, he muttered, rising. The wind whipped at his coat, carrying hints of gasoline and something harsher chemical. He pulled out his notebook and scribbled a few lines, the page trembling in the cold breeze. Frank wasn't easily shaken, but those tracks unsettled him. They disappeared deep into the forest, as if whoever drove in never meant to come back out. He stood tall, breath misting the frigid air. Whatever's happening, he said softly. It ain't just the storm. He turned toward his truck, the snow crunching beneath heavy boots. Somewhere up that mountain, he knew someone was clinging to life. And maybe, just maybe, someone else was desperately trying to hide the truth. Back at the cabin, Milo stirred. His fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Grace leaned in quickly. Logan? He's waking up. The boy's eyelids fluttered, lashes dusted with fragile ice crystals. When his eyes opened, they were pale, startled blue like the winter sky itself. He blinked up at the strange faces surrounding him. Where am I? You're safe, Grace said softly. You're in a cabin. You were lost out in the snow. His lips quivered. My mom, she's at the house. I was just feeding the deer. His voice cracked into a cough. Logan handed him a cup of warm water, holding it steady. Easy now, kid. You're okay, Logan assured him. Milo glanced at Rex, then. Rex lifted his head, eyes shining sharp and alert. The boy stretched out a trembling hand. Rex leaned in, gently resting his muzzle against the boy's palm. A soft smile flickered across Milo's face. Good boy, he whispered. And in that moment, something inside Logan cracked open for the first time in years, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. He smiled, small, but genuine. The relentless storm outside suddenly felt less endless. By the time snowflakes began drifting down in slow, lazy spirals, the cabin had changed. It wasn't any brighter. The light remained pale and gray, but it felt alive once again. Smoke curled from the chimney like a heartbeat against the calm sky. Inside, the air carried the scents of burning wood, fresh coffee, and a faint trace of something new, hope, though no one dared say it aloud yet. Grace had chosen to stay. There had been no discussion about it, no formal welcome or thanks. One morning, she simply began clearing the table, sweeping ashes near the hearth, and softly humming under her breath. Logan didn't stop her. Truth was, he couldn't recall the last time any voice, even a hum, had filled the cabin. It unsettled him, the quiet comfort of a woman moving around, as if this place was already home. Milo had recovered enough to sit by the window, a thin frame wrapped in a blanket much too large for him. His blonde hair stuck out wildly, cheeks flushed from the warmth of the fire. Shy but curious, his pale blue eyes followed every move Rex and the puppies made as they tumbled over the floorboards. "They're like soldiers," he said one morning. "Small, noisy soldiers." Logan offered a faint grin from his workbench. "That's about right." Rex glanced up, tail wagging proudly, seeming to agree. At 6 years old, his body bore the marks of battles fought and scars earned, yet his patience was unbreakable. He endured every nip and paw from the puppies, occasionally nudging them back toward their blanket with a low grunt. Grace crouched nearby, chestnut waves falling over her face. She wore one of Logan's flannel shirts over her sweater sleeves rolled up. Under her gentle touch, the cabin began to soften. Folded linens, cleaned cups, the subtle scent of soap replacing years of wood smoke and loneliness. She repaired a tear in the curtain and polished the old kettle until it gleamed like a cherished relic from better days. Logan watched from the window where he was tightening a loose hinge hand steady with tools he hadn't used since his wife passed. "You don't have to do all this," he said one day. Grace looked up, smiling softly. "I know. That's why I want to." He offered no reply, just a nod. Still, that night lying awake, listening to her soft breathing and the gentle shuffle of paws, he realized the silence that once haunted the cabin had transformed. It was no longer empty. It was filled with life. The next morning, Logan stepped outside with Rex to inspect the half-collapsed dog kennel behind the cabin. The snow had thawed enough to reveal its frame. Wooden beams weathered to silver with age nails rusted one side sagging. He crouched, running a gloved hand over the splintered wood. "We'll make it whole again," he whispered. Rex gave a single tail wag, as if pledging his loyalty to the cause. The biting cold sharpened Logan's focus like nothing else ever could. The steady beat of hammering, sawing, and tightening bolts brought back a sense of order and discipline. Somewhere between the war and the heartbreak that followed, he had lost that. But now each nail driven deep into the wood was like reclaiming a lost piece of his soul. Later, Grace appeared with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, her breath swirling into mist against the crisp air. "You know," she said, placing one carefully on the railing, "most folks would call building a kennel in the snow straight up crazy." Logan took a slow sip, glancing at her from beneath the rim. "Most folks don't have 3 dogs," he said. She laughed, that gentle musical sound he was starting to cherish. "Fair enough." She settled beside him, watching his work. "You're really good with your hands?" He shrugged lightly. "Spent years breaking things down. Figured it was time to build something that lasts." Her eyes lingered on him thoughtfully. "It suits you." He stayed silent, but her words echoed long after she went back inside. Meanwhile in town, Nora Bennett stood behind the counter of her quaint antique shop, dusting porcelain figurines arranged with care. At 71, tall for her age, her silvery hair pulled into a perfect bun, her eyes soft green-gray, once sparkled with laughter, but now held the quiet, weathered strength of a woman who had seen too much loss. A faded photo by the cash register caught the morning light, her daughter Anna smiling beside a golden retriever, both gone now. The shop bell jingled as Curtis the mail carrier stepped inside, shaking snow from his boots. "Heard something up near the ridge," he said, leaning on the counter. "That cabin the old Navy guy owned. Seems there's a woman up there now. Brought in some puppies and a boy nearly frozen through." Nora paused, with duster frozen mid-air. "A woman?" He nodded. "Word is she came through the storm saving a couple of dogs. Sheriff's still checking it out." Nora's heart skipped a strange flutter she hadn't felt in years. She hadn't set foot near the woods since Anna died, trying to rescue a stray lost on the frozen lake. Since then, she swore off anything with fur, and 4 paws, convinced that loving such creatures only brings pain. But as Curtis spoke, a memory flooded in her daughter's laugh, the warm embrace around that dog. When Curtis left, Nora locked the shop earlier than usual. Outside snow crunched beneath her boots. She hesitated once, then turned toward her old truck. "Maybe it's time," she whispered to herself. "Maybe I need to see for myself." Back at the cabin, the afternoon sunlight spilled like liquid gold over the floorboards. Grace sat by the hearth, a puppy asleep curled in her lap, another playfully nibbling the edge of her sleeve. Milo helped Logan sand the final beam for the kennel. Every few minutes, the boy glanced toward the fire, checking that Grace was still there. "You know," Logan said, noticing, "he hasn't stopped watching you since you walked in." Grace smiled, eyes not leaving the flickering flames. "Kids watch those they trust. Then you've earned that trust fast," Logan said. She met his gaze, her expression tender. "Maybe he just knows I needed someone to believe in me too." Outside, the last of the snow slid off the roof with a soft thudding sound as the sun settled deeper toward the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the worn cabin floor. As Grace softly hummed once more, a haunting melody barely whispering through the air, Rex laid his head gently on her knee, eyes half closed in quiet contentment while the puppies nestled snugly in the cradle of her arms. This was the tender scene Nora Bennett discovered an hour later, tracing the narrow trail leading up from town. Her coat was buttoned tight against the biting wind breath ragged from the climb. The snow beneath her feet was melting fast, nearly washing away the path. Yet she knew every step these woods were familiar from long ago, back when she still held on to the hope that love didn't always fade into heartbreak. When she reached the clearing, she halted. Through the window, the memory unfolded, as if time had folded back on itself. There sat Grace by the firelight, two little pups curled in her lap, her soft humming blending with the golden glow that danced upon her face. Something inside Nora shattered gently. Her gloved hand flew to her lips as tears finally welled and spilled free for the first time in decades. She let the tears come. But this wasn't grief, it was a moment of profound remembrance. She saw her daughter again cradling the dog, smiling with the same gentle hope and unwavering faith. Nora lingered outside, her breath catching in quiet shivers. Then whispering into the cold air, she said, "I forgive you, Anna. And maybe I forgive myself as well." 3 days later, the snow returned, not a fierce blizzard, but a soft, unyielding fall that blanketed the world in silent white. Logan stood by the cabin window, watching the quiet snow cover the freshly rebuilt kennel outside, his breath misting the glass. The puppies were nestled asleep by the fire, curled closely beside Rex, while Grace folded blankets nearby. Milo sat at the small table, furrowing his brow in deep focus as his pencil scribbled gently on the paper. When Logan finally turned, he asked, "Homework?" Milo shook his head, his young face serious. "No, a letter," he answered to God. Grace glanced up with a half smile. "What are you telling him, sweetheart?" Milo bit his lip, choosing each word with care. "That I'm thankful we were found. For the dogs, mostly." He paused, eyes flickering toward the sleeping puppies. "I'm asking him to watch over the others, the ones still out there waiting." The room fell silent. Grace's eyes softened, and even Logan felt the quiet ache of that small prayer settle deep within his heart. He reached out gently, tousling the boy's hair. "That's a good prayer to say," he murmured. Maybe he's already listening. Down below in the valley, the Maple Hollow Gazette, the local single-page town paper, had run a story that very morning abandoned puppies discovered near bridge. The headline read, beneath it a grainy photo showed 2 German shepherd pups wrapped snugly in a blanket. The article mentioned a local woman and a Navy veteran who had rescued them during the storm, yet it was the smaller note beneath that caught Deputy Frank Dawson's eye. It hinted at possible illegal breeding tied to previous complaints in the area. Frank sat in his cramped office, smelling faintly of old coffee and stale paper, his desk buried under piles of reports. His eyes stayed fixed on a single folder, the case from 2 years ago. Thomas Grady, owner of Grady Kennels, had faced charges of neglect and animal cruelty, but walked free after insisting the dogs were strays. Yet his gaze lingered on a single folder. The case from 2 years past. Thomas Grady, the man behind Grady Kennels, had faced accusations of neglect and cruelty to his dogs, but escaped punishment by insisting they were all strays. The case unraveled when the key witness vanished from town. Frank pressed his fingers to his temples. Grace Miller, that was her name. He hadn't realized she was the same woman now living near Logan's cabin. Rising, he grabbed his coat and stepped out into the dull morning light. His old truck groaned as it came to life. The windshield wipers scraped across the half-frozen glass. Driving toward the ridge, his mind heavy with worry. If Grady was behind the abandoned pups, it meant he was active once again. And this time someone had to put a stop to him. Meanwhile, at the cabin, Grace was wiping the table when a firm knock echoed. It wasn't a timid knock, it carried purpose. When she opened the door, there stood Frank Dawson, snow dusting his shoulders. His clear blue eyes, set under thick brows, held the tired calm of a man who'd seen too much but still believed in doing what was right. "Ma'am," he greeted with a respectful nod, tipping his hat. "I don't mean to intrude, just need a moment of your time." Grace blinked surprised. "Deputy Dawson, please come in." He stepped inside, brushing off the cold, his gaze flickering briefly to Logan, who had risen quietly from his seat. Frank recognized that stillness, a soldier's trained calm. "Logan Hayes," the man said, extending his hand. "Used to be Navy SEAL." Frank shook it firmly and respectfully. "Frank Dawson, Sheriff's Office." Grace poured some coffee as the two men exchanged silent assessments, the kind of unspoken understanding that forges trust far faster than words. Frank finally set his mug down. "I'll get right to it. The puppies you found weren't just left there by chance. We've had a string of reports near the old mill road. Same breed, same age, always abandoned in boxes, half dead." Grace's hands curled tightly around her mug. "Thomas Grady," she said softly. "He's at it again, isn't he?" Frank nodded slowly. "You know him?" She swallowed hard. "I used to work for him at Grady Kennels when I was still a vet nurse. I saw everything overbreeding, starving the unsold, dumping the sick alongside the roads. I reported it." Logan glanced sharply at her, sensing she was holding back. Grace nodded solemnly, her eyes darker. "He threatened me, said no animal clinic would ever hire me again. Then my husband passed away. I left town." Silence settled, not awkward, but charged with a building resolve. Frank leaned back. "Here's the problem, we can't touch him unless we get solid evidence. Live animals, paperwork, or a witness ready to testify." Grace met his gaze without flinching. "Then I'll be that witness." Logan's jaw clenched. "You're not going back there alone." Frank exchanged looks between them. "You both planning to kick up trouble?" His voice was low, steady. "Not trouble, justice." The deputy studied Logan for a long moment before nodding once. "You'll need to move fast. Grady's property sits across the frozen creek. It's fenced in and patrolled, but if proof exists, it's there." By evening, the sky had deepened to pewter gray. Logan packed a small rucksack, flashlight rope, extra gloves, the precise practiced habits of a soldier quietly returning to form. Rex trailed him from room to room, his tail lowered but gently wagging, sensing the heavy change in the air. Grace lingered at the doorway, her voice soft. "You don't have to do this." He turned toward her, buttoning up his coat with steady hands. I think I have to." He paused, meeting her gaze. "Why?" she asked. He sighed. "Because someone once told me saving a single life won't calm the storm. You have to keep pushing until the wind finally settles." Grace blinked, recognizing those were her own words from a few days ago. She gave a faint smile. "Then I guess neither of us will stop." Rex gave a single bark as if to seal that promise. Meanwhile, in his modest bed, Milo was still bent over by candlelight writing. The fire had faded, low flickering shadows dancing on his focused face. His handwriting was shaky, but charged with determination. "Dear God," he whispered softly as he scribbled, "please watch over the dogs still out there. They're cold and scared, like I once was. Please send someone brave enough to find them." He folded the note with care and slipped it into his pocket, the pure innocence in his heart glowing brighter than the faint candle beside him. Night's weight blanketed the mountain range. The forest stretched out like a maze of silver and black branches bowed under heavy frost. Logan stepped into the powdery snow, his breath billowing in the chill night air. Grace stood near him, tightening her hood, holding a lantern steady. Rex moved ahead, muscles tensing beneath his coat, nose to the ground, eyes sharp and watchful. Beyond the ridge lay cages filled with trembling lives, their suffering lining the pockets of a cruel man. The wind howled like a foreboding warning, but Logan pressed onward. The crunch of his boots echoed sharply. The torch's glow sliced through the dark. Behind him, Grace's voice was quiet, yet resolute. "We'll bring them home." He gave a determined nod, eyes fixed forward. Every last one of them. And under the softly falling snow, the three of them, man, woman, and dog, vanished into the woods, armed not just with rope and fire, but with a fierce never-surrender resolve to make things right. The night air sliced with icy clarity, each breath turning to fleeting mist before vanishing in the silence. Logan moved swiftly beneath the trees, the crusted snow crunching beneath his boots. Beside him, Rex trotted quietly, his thick fur dusted with frost, ears perked forward in unwavering focus. Behind them, Grace followed closely, the lantern in her hand swaying gently. Her face was pale but strong under the hood of her coat. The forest held its breath around them, branches creaking and snow shifting with their every step, a world silently bracing for what lay ahead. They reached the ridge overlooking the deserted mill road, where the kennels lay hidden behind a snow-dusted chain-link fence. From afar, it looked like just another forsaken property. But as they edged closer, the truth unfolded. Faint, helpless whimpers of frightened dogs pierced the silence. Grace froze in place. "They're alive," she whispered, voice trembling. Logan gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "Stay behind me." The kennels stretched unevenly, cages lined with frost. Within each pairs of scared eyes caught the lantern's glow. 12 small forms shivered against the cold steel. Most were German shepherd pups, but 2 older dogs, gaunt and scarred, huddled close against the far wall. The sight squeezed Logan's stomach with silent pain. He had witnessed cruelty before, in war and people, but never like this. So senseless, so silently haunting. He knelt down, testing the lock on the first cage. "Heavy duty," he muttered under his breath. Grace stepped closer, raising her lantern to pierce the darkness. "Can you cut it?" Logan reached into his pack, pulling out an old combat knife, the steel blade worn from years of use, yet still sharp enough to pry open the lock. "We'll make this work," he assured. Rex growled softly, pacing along the fence, sensing the urgency in the air. Snow began to fall again, thicker, now blanketing everything in a pure, white silence. They moved quickly. Every lock gave way with a sharp snap and a groan. Grace knelt, coaxing the frightened puppies out one by one, whispering soothing words as her gloved hands trembled while wrapping them carefully in her scarf. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "You're safe now." Her hair had fallen free from its braid, strands sticking to her face, eyes shimmering in the flickering lantern light. She looked like someone both delicate and unbreakable all at once, a woman battling shadows armed only with the strength of her heart. One of the elder dogs limped forward, ribs showing beneath his coat, one ear ragged and torn. He sniffed Grace's hand, then gazed up at her with tired, wise eyes. "Rex," Logan said quietly. "Let him know we're not here to harm." Rex stepped forward carefully, tail low, every step cautious. The 2 dogs touched noses, a silent pact passing between them. Trust, recognition, and relief. The elder dog relaxed under Grace's gentle touch. But as they freed the final cage, headlights stabbed